The training hall smelled like fear and old blood. David watched another cadet get dragged out, their uniform torn and their pride shattered. The creature had roared at them for 30 seconds before the instructors called it off. 30 seconds was considered good. Some lasted only 5. "Next group, prepare yourselves," Instructor Vorn announced, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled cadets. He was from a warrior species called the Telmari, beings who had conquered 12 systems before joining the Galactic Coalition. Even he treated the trial with respect. David sat among his classmates in the viewing section. To his left was Rila, a tall insectoid whose people were known for their tactical brilliance. To his right was Braun, a massive bear-like alien whose fur changed colors with his emotions. Right now it showed nervous gray streaks. "I heard a cadet died last year," Rila whispered, her antenna twitching. "The beast sensed their fear and attacked." 3 years ago, actually," Braun corrected, his voice rumbling. "But yes, 23 deaths in 3,000 years. The Drakmir does not forgive weakness." David said nothing. He had studied every available recording of the trial. The Drakmir was not just dangerous. It was designed to be the perfect killer. Some ancient race had created it before they destroyed themselves. Now it served as the ultimate test for military cadets across the galaxy. The next cadet entered the arena floor. Her name was Skesh, from a species that looked like walking crystals. She was top of their class in combat simulations. David had never beaten her in hand-to-hand training. The far door opened with a grinding sound of metal on stone. The Drakmir emerged. It stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder. Its body was covered in armored plates that shifted colors from black to deep purple. 6 legs carried its massive frame forward, each ending in claws that could slice through steel. The head was the worst part. It resembled a wolf mixed with something reptilian, with too many teeth and eyes that glowed with terrible intelligence. The Drakmir looked at Skesh and roared. The sound was not just noise. It carried something deeper, something that reached into the primitive parts of the brain and screamed, "Run!" Skesh held her ground. Her crystalline body hardened, becoming opaque as she prepared for possible combat. The instructors had explained that fighting was allowed, but no one had ever won. The goal was to show courage, to prove you would not break under pressure. 45 seconds. That was how long Skesh lasted before the Drakmir took a step toward her, and she took a step back. The moment she retreated, the trial ended. The beast had proven dominance acceptable, Instructor Vorn declared. "Next candidate, David of Earth." The room went quiet. David stood up, feeling dozens of eyes on him. Humans were still new to the Galactic Coalition. Only 15 years had passed since first contact. Most species saw them as interesting but unremarkable. They came from a light gravity world, had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. "Good luck," Rila said softly. David walked down the stairs to the arena floor. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had prepared for this moment since he arrived at the academy 6 months ago. The arena was circular, about 50 meters across, with walls of smooth metal. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, just you and the beast. Instructor Vorn's voice came through speakers. "You know the rules. Stand your ground as long as you can. Show courage. Show strength. The Drakmir will test you. When you retreat or when 1 minute passes, the trial ends. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," David called back. "Then begin." The far door opened again. The Drakmir had been allowed to rest for only 5 minutes between trials. It was meant to be tired, meant to be less aggressive. It did not look tired. The beast's eyes locked onto David. It began to walk forward slowly, each footstep echoing through the arena. David had watched this approach dozens of times in recordings. The Drakmir was analyzing him, using senses that humans barely understood. It could detect heartbeat, breathing rate, chemical signals in sweat. It knew fear better than any living thing. David took a breath and did something none of the recordings had shown. He relaxed, not pretend relaxed, actually relaxed. He let his shoulders drop, let his breathing slow, let his hands hang loose at his sides. Every instructor had taught cadets to stand firm, to radiate strength and aggression. David did the opposite. The Drakmir stopped. Its head tilted slightly, confusion evident in its movements. In the viewing area, Braun leaned forward. "What is he doing?" Instructor Vorn said nothing, but his antennae were rigid with attention. David did not meet the Drakmir's eyes directly. On Earth, he had grown up with dogs. His family had owned 3. His grandmother had worked at an animal shelter. He knew that direct eye contact with a predator was a challenge. Instead, he looked at the creature's chest, keeping it in his peripheral vision. The Drakmir took another step forward, then another. It was now close enough that David could smell it, a scent like heated stone and something sharper like ozone before a storm. David remained still. His mind was not empty. He was aware of every danger, every claw and tooth, but he was not projecting fear or aggression. He was projecting something else, something he could not name but felt deeply. Trust. Calm. The quiet confidence of a creature that belonged. The Drakmir's posture began to change. Its armored plates shifted color, becoming lighter. Its 6 legs adjusted stance, no longer coiled to spring. The massive head lowered slightly, and it made a sound that was not a roar. It was almost like a question. David slowly extended one hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. He held it out to the side, not reaching toward the beast, but simply offering. The Drakmir stepped forward and pressed its enormous head against David's chest. The weight of it nearly knocked him over, but he kept his balance. The creature was not attacking. It was not testing. It was accepting. In the viewing area, someone dropped something that clattered loudly. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. David stood there with the Drakmir leaning against him like an enormous, deadly dog, and he slowly brought his other hand up to rest on the side of its armored head. "Impossible," Instructor Vorn whispered. 60 seconds passed, then 90, then 2 minutes. The trial had ended long ago by the normal rules, but no one moved to stop it. Everyone was watching something that had never happened in 3,000 years of tradition. Finally, David stepped back gently. The Drakmir remained where it was, watching him with those glowing eyes. Then it turned and walked calmly back to its chamber. The door closed behind it with a soft boom. David stood alone in the center of the arena, breathing hard now that it was over. The viewing area erupted into chaos. They locked David in a medical bay for 3 hours while scientists argued outside the door. He could hear their voices rising and falling, words in a dozen languages mixing together. Some sounded angry, others sounded frightened. A female doctor finally entered, her scales reflecting the harsh lights. She was Norian, a species known for their medical expertise and cold logic. She carried several scanning devices. "Hold still," she said, running a device over his head. It hummed and beeped. She frowned at the readings, then ran it again. No pheromone emitters. No neural disruptors. No technology at all. "I told them that already," David said. She ignored him and took a blood sample, then a tissue sample. Then she made him breathe into a sensor while she recorded the chemical composition of his breath. After 20 minutes of tests, she stepped back and looked at him with her large, golden eyes. "What did you do to that creature?" "Nothing," David said honestly. "I just stood there. You did more than stand." The Drakmir has never shown submission behavior to any cadet in 3,000 years. It has killed warriors from species far more physically impressive than yours. Yet it treated you like pack. David did not know how to explain it. Maybe it just wanted to. The doctor made a sharp clicking sound that might have been a laugh. Creatures do not want anything against their nature. The Drakmir was engineered to dominate. You somehow convinced it to do the opposite. Before David could respond, the door opened again. Instructor Vorn entered, followed by 3 other instructors David had never seen before. They wore different uniforms marked with symbols that indicated they were from the Academy Council itself. "We need answers," one of them said. She was Kelthori, a species that resembled tall, slender birds with hands instead of wings. Her feathers were deep blue. "Your performance has created significant concern." "Concern?" David asked. "I passed the trial." "You did more than pass," Instructor Vorn said quietly. "You broke 3,000 years of precedent. The Council needs to understand why." They took him to a different room, larger and filled with equipment. A team of xenobiologists was already there, along with more instructors and several military officials whose ranks David could not identify. One of the xenobiologists, an old male from a species called the Pethran, gestured for David to sit. The Pethran had 6 arms and fur like gray moss. He was considered one of the greatest minds in the study of cross-species behavior. "Tell me about Earth animals," he said without introduction. David blinked. "What kind of animals?" "The predators. The dangerous ones. How does your species interact with them?" David thought about it. "We avoid most of them, but some we live with. Dogs, cats, horses. Those used to be wild, but we made them domestic. The room went very quiet. Explain domestic, the Pithran said slowly. We bred them over thousands of years to live with us, to trust us, to be part of our families. Dogs used to be wolves. We turned them into companions. You turned apex predators into companions. The Pithran's voice was strange. Voluntarily? Well, yes. Is that unusual? The xenobiologist turned to his colleagues. They began speaking rapidly in a language David did not understand. The Pithran turned back to him, all 6 arms gesturing with excitement. Young human, no other species in the known galaxy has done this. Most intelligent life evolved by avoiding predators, by hiding or running or developing defenses. Your species is the only one that evolved by befriending them. David tried to process this, but surely other species have working animals. Working animals, yes. Prey animals that have been trained. Herbivores that can be controlled. But you speak of predators. You speak of creatures that could kill you, choosing not to. That is unknown to us. One of the military officials leaned forward. He was Talmari like Instructor Vorn, but older, with scars across his face. This changes things. If humans can communicate with hostile fauna in ways we cannot, that is a strategic asset. I do not see it as an asset, David said carefully. I just treated the Drachmir like it was a living thing instead of a test. And that is precisely what makes you unique, the Pithran said. Every other species sees a threat to be endured or defeated. You saw a being to be understood. They asked him more questions. How did he grow up? What animals did he know? How did he learn to read their behavior? David answered as best he could, but much of it was instinct. He had never thought about why he knew when a dog was friendly or when it needed space. He just knew. Finally, they let him return to his quarters. It was late in the station cycle, what passed for night. Most cadets were sleeping. But when David entered the common area, he found Rila and Braun waiting for him. We wanted to make sure you were okay, Rila said. I am fine. They just had questions. Braun's fur was showing colors David had not seen before, complicated patterns of respect and uncertainty. Everyone is talking about you. Some think you cheated somehow. Others think you are dangerous. A few think you are blessed by old gods. David sat down heavily. I am none of those things.
I just did not want to fight it. That is the part no one understands, Rila said.
Her antennae were bent forward in curiosity. Every species in the coalition believes strength comes from the ability to dominate threats. You showed strength through acceptance. It does not make sense to us. Does it need to make sense? David asked. Yes, Braun said simply. Because tomorrow the council is going to ask you to do it again. They have other creatures in the xenobiology department. Creatures that have never been tamed. They want to see if what happened with the Drachmir was chance or something more. David felt tired suddenly. He had not asked for this attention. He had just wanted to pass the trial like everyone else. What if I refuse? He asked. Then you will always be the human who did the impossible once, Rila said, and no one will ever know if you could do it again. Is that what you want? David thought about the Drachmir, about how it had looked at him with those glowing eyes, about how it had chosen to trust instead of attack, about how something ancient and dangerous had decided just for a moment that maybe they could understand each other. No, he said finally. I guess I want to know too. Braun's fur shifted to warm orange, relief and approval. Then we will stand with you. Whatever happens, you are our classmate. Our friend, Rila clicked her agreement. The galaxy may not understand you yet, David of Earth, but we will help them learn. David looked at his friends and felt something settle in his chest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new chances to fail. But tonight he had people who believed in him. That would have to be enough. The xenobiology department occupied an entire section of the academy, filled with enclosures that held creatures from across the galaxy. David walked through corridors lined with reinforced glass, watching things that crawled, flew, and lurked in darkness. Each one was labeled with its planet of origin and threat level. Professor Silt led the way, his tentacles moving in patterns that suggested nervous excitement. He was Quellan, a species that lived in underwater cities and communicated partially through color changes in their skin. Right now his skin was cycling through rapid patterns of blue and yellow. We keep specimens here for study, he explained. Some are used in advanced biology courses. Others are too dangerous for general education. Those are kept in the deep sections. And that is where we are going. David asked. Yes, the Council wants to understand your ability. We have selected 3 creatures. All of them have resisted every attempt at domestication or even peaceful contact. They passed through a security door that required 3 different authorizations. Beyond it, the air felt colder, and the sounds from the enclosures were different, more aggressive. More primal. Instructor Vorn was already there, along with several military officials and the old Pethran xenobiologist from yesterday. They stood before a large enclosure with walls made of layered force fields rather than physical barriers. Inside was something that looked like a cat mixed with lightning. Its body was sleek and black, about the size of a large earth tiger, but electricity crackled along its fur in blue-white arcs. Its eyes were pure white, without pupils. This is a stormfang from the planet Redris, Professor Silt said. Its world has constant electrical storms. The creatures evolved to hunt using bioelectric fields. They can sense nervous systems from 50 meters away. 3 handlers have been killed trying to manage them. We keep this one sedated during transport. You want me to go in there? David asked. We want to see if you can establish the same connection you did with the Drakmir, the Pethran said. But we will have safety protocols active. At the first sign of aggression, we extract you. David looked at the creature. It was pacing along the back of its enclosure, energy sparking with each footstep. It looked angry and bored and dangerous all at once. All right, he said. What do I do? Simply enter. Approach if you feel it is safe. We will monitor everything. They gave him protective gear, though everyone agreed it probably would not help much if the Stormfang decided to attack. The suit was designed to insulate against electrical discharge, but the creature's claws were also razor-sharp. David stood at the entrance to the enclosure, watching the Stormfang through the force field. His heart was pounding again, just like with the Drakmir, but this time he knew what he needed to do. Not dominate. Not even protect himself, just be present. The force field lowered with a sound like tearing fabric. David stepped through. The Stormfang stopped pacing immediately. Its head snapped toward him, white eyes fixing on his position. The electricity along its fur intensified, crackling louder. It took a step forward, then another. David did not move. He kept his breathing steady, his posture relaxed. The air smelled like ozone, sharp and clean. The creature was analyzing him just like the Drakmir had, using senses he could only guess at. The Stormfang circled him slowly, staying about 5 meters away. David turned slightly to keep it in his peripheral vision but did not face it directly. He had learned long ago that predators saw direct attention as a challenge. Outside the enclosure, everyone watched in silence. Professor Silt's skin had gone pale green, a sign of extreme stress in Quellens. The Stormfang completed its circle and sat down. Just sat, like a cat deciding whether something was worth its time. The electricity in its fur decreased slightly. David took one small step forward, then stopped. The Stormfang's ears twitched forward. David took another step. This continued for several minutes, a slow negotiation of space and trust. Finally, David was close enough to extend his hand. He held it out low, palm down, fingers relaxed. The Stormfang stood and walked over. It sniffed his hand, and David felt a strange tingling sensation as its bioelectric field brushed against his skin. Then the creature did something that made Professor Silt gasp audibly. It rubbed its head against David's hand. The contact sent small shocks through David's arm, but they did not hurt. They felt like static electricity, surprising but not painful. The Stormfang made a sound that was half purr, half electrical hum. David carefully scratched behind its ears, right where he would pet a cat on Earth. The creature leaned into the touch, and the electricity in its fur calmed to occasional small sparks. Extraordinary, the Pethran whispered outside. They let David stay with the Stormfang for 10 more minutes before calling him out. The creature watched him leave but did not try to follow. It simply sat back down and resumed its pacing, though its movement seemed less agitated than before. When David emerged, Professor Silt was cycling through so many colors he looked like a rainbow. I have studied these creatures for 20 years. What you just did should not be possible. It felt possible, David said. You know the most unsettling part? Instructor Vorn said. We have been watching your biometric data. Your heart rate barely elevated. You were not pretending to be calm. You were actually calm. Should I not be? Any rational being should be terrified of a Stormfang, one of the military officials said. Fear is survival instinct. You seem to lack appropriate threat response. David shook his head. I was afraid. But fear and respect are not the same thing. I respected that the Stormfang could hurt me, but I did not treat it like it wanted to. The Pethran made a gesture with his arms that indicated understanding. You assume good intent. Most species assume hostile intent until proven otherwise. You do the reverse. Is that wrong? David asked. No, the xenobiologist said slowly. Just unprecedented. They took him to 2 more creatures that day. One was a massive armored thing that looked like a rhinoceros made of metal plates. It had crushed its last enclosure and put 6 guards in medical bay. David stood with it for 20 minutes and eventually it let him touch its armored side. He felt it rumble beneath his palm, a sound like distant thunder. The 3rd creature was something that lived in darkness, all long limbs and too many joints. It had never allowed anyone within 10 meters. David sat on the floor of its enclosure and waited. After an hour, it crept forward and touched his shoulder with something that might have been a hand. Its skin was cold but not slimy, and it smelled like old libraries. By the end of the day, David was exhausted, not from fear but from the intense concentration required. Each creature was different, required different approaches, different patience. The council gathered that evening to discuss the results. David was asked to attend. He sat in a large chamber while officials from a dozen species debated what his ability meant. We must consider the strategic implications, one insisted. If humans can pacify dangerous fauna, they could be used in hostile environments where others cannot go. Or they could teach us, another argued. Perhaps the human approach to threat assessment is something we can learn. Or perhaps, a third said darkly, they are too trusting and it will get them killed eventually. Finally, the council leader stood. She was ancient even by long-lived species standards, a being called a Vortan whose people measured time in centuries. Her voice was like wind through canyons. The Academy has stood for 3,000 years on a foundation of tested principles. This human has challenged those principles in 3 days. We must decide if this is evolution or aberration. She turned her vast eyes toward David. Young human, do you understand what you have done? David stood. I treated living things like they deserved respect even when they were dangerous. I thought that was normal. The Vortan was quiet for a long moment. Then she made a sound that might have been laughter. Perhaps it should be. News traveled fast through the Galactic Coalition networks. Within a week, every major world knew about the human who could pacify creatures that had terrified civilizations for generations. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a trick. The human homeworld, Earth, sent official observers to the Academy to study what was happening. David tried to continue normal classes, but everything had changed. Other cadets looked at him differently now, some with respect, some with suspicion. A few avoided him entirely, as if whatever made him special might be contagious or dangerous. He was in the combat training hall when the emergency message came through. Instructor Vorn appeared on every screen simultaneously, his expression grave. All personnel, we have received a priority distress call from the colony world of Person 3. The situation is critical. Council members and senior staff, report to the command center immediately. David was not senior staff, but Professor Silt found him 20 minutes later. You need to come with me. The council is requesting your presence. The command center was organized chaos. Holographic displays showed a planet under siege. David could see a city surrounded by massive creatures that looked like bears crossed with tanks, each one the size of a small building. They were destroying buildings and the colonists were trapped. The Vortan council leader was coordinating response teams. She saw David enter and gestured him forward. We have a problem that conventional military force cannot solve. I am told you might offer an alternative. She activated a detailed display. Person 3 was colonized 40 years ago. The survey showed large fauna but nothing hostile. However, 3 months ago these creatures began migrating toward the main colony city. They have destroyed outer settlements and are now at the city walls. All attempts at deterrence have failed. All attempts at communication have failed. The creatures seem driven by pure territorial aggression. How many colonists? David asked. 30,000. Mostly civilians. We can evacuate, but it will take weeks to move everyone. The creatures will breach the walls in days. One of the military officials spoke up. We can use heavy weapons. Orbital bombardment could eliminate the threat and kill an entire species that may simply be protecting its territory, the Vortan said sharply. We are not conquerors. We seek coexistence. Then what do you suggest? The official challenged. The Vortan turned to David. I suggest we try something unprecedented. Human. These creatures have shown no response to any standard contact protocols, but neither had the Drekmir, the Stormfang, or any of the others you approached. Would you be willing to try? David looked at the holographic images. The creatures were massive and clearly agitated. Going near them would be extremely dangerous. But he thought about 30,000 people trapped, about a species that might be killed simply for defending its home. I will try, he said. The preparations took 2 days. They assembled a small team. David, Professor Silt, Instructor Vorn, and Rila and Braun, who insisted on volunteering. They would take a fast transport to Person 3, then approach the creatures on the ground. During the journey, David studied everything available about the creatures. They were called Grish, and they were native to Person 3. They typically lived in the mountains and rarely approached lowlands. But something had changed. The leading theory was that the colony's expansion had disrupted their breeding grounds. If that is true, as David said, then they are not attacking. They are trying to reclaim territory. That does not make them less dangerous, Instructor Vorn pointed out. Territorial aggression is often more intense than predatory behavior. But it means they have a reason, David said. Reasons can be addressed. They landed at the colony as the sun was setting. The city walls were 30 meters high, reinforced steel and energy barriers. Beyond them, David could see the Grish moving in the gathering darkness. Their massive forms cast long shadows. There were at least 200 of them. The colony administrator, a nervous man named Kelsey, met them at the command post. Thank goodness you are here. We have hours, not days. The barriers are failing. David looked at the walls, then at the gathered creatures beyond. I need to go out there. That is suicide, Kelsey said flatly. That is the mission, David replied. They argued for 10 minutes before the Vortan's direct command came through. Allow the human to attempt contact. Kelsey agreed reluctantly. David requested several things. First, all weapons to be powered down. Second, the barriers facing the Grish to be lowered. Third, the colonists to stay inside and remain quiet. You want us defenseless? Kelsey asked in disbelief. I want you to stop looking like a threat, David corrected. These creatures are reacting to aggression. We need to stop being aggressive. As night fell completely, they lowered one section of the barrier. David stood at the opening looking out at the Grish. Behind him, Braun whispered, We are with you, friend. David stepped through the opening alone. The ground beyond the walls was torn up from the creature's movements. David walked forward slowly, his footsteps crunching on broken earth. The Grish noticed him immediately. The nearest one raised its massive head and made a sound like grinding stone. David stopped walking. He stood in the open, easily visible in the lights from the city behind him. He was utterly vulnerable, and he made no attempt to hide it. The Grish that had called out began moving toward him. The ground shook with each step. David could hear gasps from the walls behind him, but he did not look back. He kept his attention on the approaching creature. It stopped 5 meters away, so close David could smell it. The scent was like wet earth and pine. The Grish lowered its head to David's level, and he could see intelligence in its small eyes. David did what he had done with the Drekmir and the Stormfang. He relaxed. He showed no aggression, no fear that would trigger predatory instinct, no challenge that would provoke territorial response. He simply stood as a creature that existed in the same space, neither threat nor prey. The Grish huffed a breath that stirred David's hair. Then it made a softer sound, almost questioning. David slowly sat down on the ground. The action made him even more vulnerable, but it also made him smaller, less threatening. He was showing submission without weakness, acceptance without challenge. The Grish watched him for a long moment. Then it too lowered itself to the ground, settling its massive body with a sound like a small avalanche. They sat there together in the darkness, human and Grish, while hundreds of creatures and thousands of colonists watched in absolute silence. David did not know how long they stayed like that. Time felt strange. Eventually, the Grish stood and walked back toward the others of its kind. David stood as well, his legs stiff from sitting. The Grish gathered together, making sounds to each other. David could not understand the sounds, but he understood the body language. They were discussing something. Deciding something. Finally, the largest Grish, A creature that seemed ancient even among its kind approached the colony walls. It stopped at the barrier opening where David had emerged. For a moment, David thought it would enter and chaos would follow. Instead, the Grish raised one massive paw and pushed a boulder that had been near the wall. It rolled the boulder away from the colony, clearing space. Then it turned and made a gesture with its head, a clear signal to the others. The Grish began to leave. Not running, not driven away, but choosing to go. They moved back toward the mountains in organized groups, leaving the colony territory intact. David stood watching them disappear into the darkness. Behind him, the colony erupted in cheers and confusion and relief. But David was not listening to that. He was listening to the sound of the Grish calling to each other as they went home. Their territory dispute resolved not through violence but through understanding. Instructor Vorn came to stand beside him. "How did you know they would listen?" "I did not know," David admitted. "But I knew they were not monsters. They were just defending their home. Once they understood we were not the threat they thought we were, they chose peace. The galaxy is going to want you to do this everywhere," Vorn said quietly. "Every world with hostile fauna, every territory dispute, every impossible situation." David thought about that. "Then I guess I will be busy." David returned to the academy as something he had never wanted to be. Famous. Messages came from across the coalition. Requests for interviews, demands for his presence at scientific conferences, even marriage proposals from species he had never heard of. He ignored most of them. What he could not ignore were the other humans who arrived at the academy. Earth had sent a delegation of specialists, animal behaviorists, anthropologists, military strategists. They wanted to understand what made David special so they could teach it to others. Dr. Wei was the leader of the human delegation. She was older than David's mother, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from him in a private conference room recording everything. "Tell me about your childhood," she said. "Why does that matter?" "Because you have an ability that the rest of the galaxy lacks. We need to understand where it comes from." David sighed and told her. He grew up in a small town. His family had dogs, cats, chickens, even a horse for a few years. His grandmother worked with rescue animals. He spent his childhood around creatures that other people feared or did not understand. He learned young that animals were not unpredictable. They were just speaking a language most people did not bother to learn. Dr. Wei took notes on everything. "Did you have special training?" "No, I just paid attention. When a dog growls, it is saying something. When a cat's ears go back, it means something. People think animals are simple, but they are just honest. They tell you exactly what they are feeling if you know how to look." "And you think this is common among humans?" David shrugged. "I think it could be. We just forgot how to do it. Once humans moved to cities away from animals, we stopped learning their language. But the ability is still there." Dr. Wei considered this. "The galaxy sees you as unique. But you are saying any human could do what you do? Maybe not exactly the same way. But yes, I think so. Humans have been living with animals for thousands of years. We know how to read them, how to communicate without words. We just do not practice it anymore." The other humans in the delegation were excited by this possibility. If David's ability was not unique but learnable, it could change humanity's role in the galaxy. They began developing training programs, studying Earth's history of animal domestication, even bringing some Earth animals to the Academy for demonstration. But not everyone was happy about humanity's rising prominence. At a coalition council meeting that David was required to attend, several species voiced concerns. "Humans have been part of the coalition for only 15 years, one representative argued. Now they claim special abilities that could give them disproportionate influence. This is concerning." "We claim nothing," Dr. Wei responded calmly. "We simply demonstrated a skill that our species developed naturally. Other species are welcome to learn it as well. A skill that makes dangerous creatures docile," another representative said. "What stops humans from using this to control military assets? War beasts, guard creatures, biological weapons?" The room went cold. David stood, though he had not planned to speak. "We do not control anything. That is the point you are all missing. Control is what you have been trying for centuries, and it does not work. What we do is communicate. We offer respect and receive it in return. You cannot weaponize mutual respect." "A naive view," the skeptical representative said. "In war, such abilities would be invaluable." "Then perhaps the problem is war itself." David said, and sat down. The debate continued for hours, but no resolution was reached. The galaxy was divided on what humanity's new role should be. Meanwhile, David continued his studies at the academy. He was still a cadet, still learning military strategy and starship operations and all the practical skills needed for service in the coalition forces. But now he also spent time in the xenobiology department, working with creatures that had been deemed impossible to manage. Professor Silt became his mentor in this work. The old Quellan had decades of experience with alien fauna, and he was eager to learn David's methods. "You keep saying it is about communication," Silt said one day as they observed a creature that looked like a living crystal formation. "But what exactly are you communicating?" David thought about it. "I'm saying I see you. I respect you. I am not here to hurt you or dominate you. I am just here, and then I wait to see if they say the same thing back. But they do not use words. Neither do I, really. Words are just one kind of language. Body position, breathing, eye contact, even smell. All of these communicate things. I just try to make sure everything I am saying with my body matches what I want to say." Silt's skin flickered through thoughtful colors. "And what you want to say is peace." "Not exactly. Peace implies the absence of conflict. What I offer is acknowledgement. Most species treat animals as lesser beings or as threats. I treat them as equals who happen to be shaped differently." This concept was difficult for many species to grasp. The galaxy had organized itself into hierarchies: sentient species at the top, non-sentient creatures below, resources below that. The idea that a human would see a dangerous predator as an equal was almost offensive to some, but others began to see the value. A researcher from a species called the Harnan came to the academy specifically to learn from David. Her people had been trying to establish a colony on a world with aggressive pack hunters for 20 years. Every settlement attempt had failed. "Can you teach me?" she asked David. "I can try. But it is not just technique. It is mindset. You have to genuinely see the creatures as deserving of respect." They worked together for weeks. David showed her how to observe without judging, how to move without threatening, how to be present without asserting dominance. The Harnan was a good student, patient and willing to unlearn old assumptions. When she finally returned to her world, she sent a message months later. She had established peaceful coexistence with the pack hunters, not by defeating them or driving them away, but by showing them that her people could share the territory. More requests came. A mining operation was being disrupted by territorial flyers. A research station could not operate because local fauna kept destroying equipment. A colony ship had found their destination world inhabited by creatures no one could approach safely. David could not help them all personally. There were not enough hours in the day and he was still just one person. But what he could do was teach. The academy approved a new course: interspecies communication and coexistence. David was not the instructor, he was too young and inexperienced. But Professor Silt taught it, using David's methods and bringing him in as a guest lecturer. The first class had 30 students from 15 species. They were skeptical at first. The idea of approaching danger with openness rather than defensive aggression went against every military training they had received. But David showed them. He brought them to the xenobiology department and demonstrated with creature after creature. He showed them how to read body language across species barriers, how to project calm even when afraid, how to wait for acceptance rather than demanding it. The hardest part, he told the class, is letting go of the need to control the outcome. When you approach an animal with a predetermined goal, they sense it. They know you want something from them. But if you approach with curiosity and respect, offering nothing but your presence, they have the freedom to choose how to respond. And most creatures, when given that freedom, choose peace. Not every student could master it. Some were too trained in aggression, too conditioned to see threats everywhere. But some understood. And those few began teaching others. It was a small start. The galaxy had thousands of worlds, millions of dangerous species, countless situations where humans and other coalition members would face hostile fauna. David's method would not work for everything. Sometimes defensive force was necessary. Sometimes coexistence was impossible. But sometimes, just sometimes, there was another way. And that possibility was starting to change how the galaxy thought about the creatures they shared space with. David lay in his quarters one night, exhausted from another day of teaching and demonstrations. His personal communicator showed 60 new messages. Requests, questions, invitations, debates. The galaxy wanted something from him that he was not sure he could give. But then he thought about the Drakmir, about how it had chosen to trust him in that arena. About the Stormfang and the Grish and all the other creatures who had given him a chance when they had every reason to attack. They had not needed him to be special or unique or gifted. They had just needed him to be honest. Maybe that was enough. Maybe the galaxy did not need humanity to be better than everyone else. Maybe they just needed to be reminded that there were other ways to be strong. 5 years passed, though they felt both longer and shorter than David expected. He graduated from the academy with honors, not because of his work with creatures, but because he excelled at strategy and leadership. The instructors said he had an ability to see situations from multiple perspectives, to find solutions that others missed. David thought that was just another version of what he had always done, paying attention to what others were actually saying, instead of what he expected them to say. He received offers from a dozen different coalition branches, military command positions, research roles, diplomatic posts. He chose something simpler. He became a specialist in hostile environment integration. Officially, that meant he helped colonies establish peaceful coexistence with dangerous local fauna. Unofficially, it meant he traveled to worlds where humans and aliens were about to do something violent and tried to find a better way. Rila and Bron stayed with him. They had all graduated together, and they worked well as a team. Rila's tactical mind helped them avoid dangerous situations. Bron's physical strength gave them confidence in emergencies, and David's ability to communicate across species barriers opened doors that should have stayed closed. Their current mission had brought them to a world on the edge of Coalition space. The planet was called Frost Haven, and it was beautiful in a harsh way. Ice plains stretched for thousands of miles, broken by mountains of frozen crystal. The colony here was small, only 500 people, mostly scientists studying the unique geology. But they had a problem. Something lived beneath the ice, something large and aggressive that had already killed 3 colonists. The coalition had sent David's team to assess whether evacuation was necessary or if coexistence was possible. David stood on the ice plain, watching his breath turn to fog in the cold air. The sun here was distant and pale, giving everything a blue-white quality. Beneath his feet, the ice was thick enough to support buildings, but sensors showed it was honeycombed with tunnels. "Whatever is down there is big," Rila said, studying her scanner. "Multiple heat signatures, possibly a colony or family group. They seem to be moving in coordinated patterns." "Intelligent?" Bron asked. "Unknown, but organized at least." The colony administrator, a woman named Farron, approached them across the ice. She looked tired and worried. "Have you determined if we need to evacuate?" "Not yet," David said. "We need to make contact first." "Contact? Those things killed my people. We tried everything." "Barriers do not work because they tunnel under. Weapons just make them more aggressive. They seem to hate us being here." "Or they are trying to protect something," David said. "Rila, are we near any breeding grounds or food sources?" Rila checked her data. The colony is built directly above the warmest section of the underground tunnels. If these creatures are adapted to cold, they might need warm spots for reproduction or hibernation. David nodded slowly. "Then we built on their most important territory. They are not attacking us. They are defending their home. So what do we do?" Farron asked. "We talked to them. They are not sentient. They cannot negotiate." "Maybe not with words," David said, "but they can understand intent." He had them prepare a drill site away from the colony. They would create an opening to the underground tunnels and attempt contact in a location that was not actively threatening the creature's territory. It took 2 days to set up properly. When they finally broke through the ice into the tunnels below, warm air rushed up to meet them. David could smell minerals and something organic, like whetstone and living earth combined. "I am going down," he announced. "Alone?" Bron's fur showed alarmed red patterns. "I will have communication equipment. If something goes wrong, you can seal the tunnel." "But I need to do this without appearing as a group threat," they argued, but David was the mission leader. He descended into the tunnel on a harness line, lights attached to his suit cutting through the darkness below. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber about 30 meters down. David unclipped from the harness and stood in the space, letting his eyes adjust. The walls were not just ice, but something crystalline, and they refracted his lights into soft patterns. The chamber was warm compared to the surface, probably just below freezing rather than the deadly cold above. He heard movement in the darkness. Something large shifting position, then another sound and another. Multiple creatures were in the chamber with him. David turned off his helmet lights. It seemed wrong somehow to blind them with brightness in their own home. He activated a softer glow stick instead, just enough to see by. Shapes emerged from the darkness. They were not what he expected. The creatures were roughly bear-like in build, but covered in what looked like crystalline plates rather than fur. Their eyes reflected his dim light, showing intelligence. There were 5 of them in the chamber, ranging from massive to what must be juveniles. A family group. David had interrupted a family in their home. The largest creature, probably the parent, moved forward. It made a sound like ice cracking, low and warning. David stood still, making himself as non-threatening as possible. He slowly sat down on the tunnel floor, making himself smaller. The creature stopped its advance. Its head tilted, similar to how the Drakmir had reacted years ago. David began to speak, not because the creature could understand his words, but because his voice carried tone and intent. "I am sorry we built on your home. We did not know you were here. We did not mean to threaten your family." The creature made another sound, softer this time. The juveniles behind it moved slightly, curious but cautious. David continued talking, keeping his voice low and calm. "We want to find a way to share this world. We do not need to be enemies. There is space enough for both of us." He reached into his pack slowly, telegraphing every movement. He pulled out a thermal pack, one of the chemical warmers the colony used. He activated it and set it on the ground between himself and the creature. The creature approached carefully. It sniffed the thermal pack, then touched it with one crystalline paw. David could see understanding in its reaction. Warmth. The thing these creatures needed most in this frozen world. David pulled out 3 more thermal packs and activated them, placing them in a small circle. "We can help. We can make warm spaces for you that do not require you to fight us for territory." The creature picked up one of the thermal packs gently in its mouth and carried it back to the juveniles. They gathered around it, their crystalline plates catching the light as they absorbed the warmth. David sat there for 2 hours, occasionally placing new thermal packs when the old ones cooled. The creatures came closer gradually, until the juveniles were near enough to touch. One of them, braver than the others, reached out and tapped David's leg with a crystalline paw. He smiled. "Hello there." When he finally climbed back up to the surface, his team rushed to meet him. "You were down there for hours," Ryla said. "We were about to come after you." "I was talking," David said, "and I think they listened." Over the next week, they worked with the colony to implement a solution. They created thermal wells, powered drilling systems that brought warm water up from deep below the ice. The wells were positioned away from the colony but accessible to the creatures. They also modified the colony's foundation to allow the creatures to pass underneath without damaging structures. The attacks stopped. The creatures used the thermal wells and seemed content to leave the colony alone, as long as their territory was respected. Occasionally, colonists would see them moving across the ice plains, their crystalline bodies catching the pale sunlight. Farron stood with David on the day his team was scheduled to leave. "You know the coalition wanted us to either eliminate those creatures or evacuate. You gave us a third option." "It was always there," David said. "People just do not look for it usually." "Why do you think humans see it when others do not?" David had been asked this question 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. He gave the same answer he always did. Because for most of human history, we had to share our world with creatures that could kill us. We learned to live with danger instead of just running from it or destroying it. That history made us different. "The galaxy is changing because of people like you," Farron said. 5 years ago, the coalition would have wiped out those creatures without a second thought. Now they try to find ways to coexist first. That is because of what you started. David looked out across the ice plains. "I did not start anything. I just remembered something we forgot. Every creature, no matter how dangerous, is just trying to survive and protect what matters to them. When you remember that, violence stops being the first option," his communicator chimed. "Another mission. Another world where humans and aliens and local fauna were learning to share space." The galaxy had thousands of such situations, and David's team could only help a few of them. But there were other teams now, Other people trained in the methods he had demonstrated. Some were human, some were not. The ability to see creatures as deserving of respect was spreading. Braun appeared at the shuttle entrance, his fur showing ready-to-go patterns. Our transport is prepared. Where to next? David checked the mission details. A mining world with territorial flyers. A colony ship that found their destination inhabited. A research station surrounded by what the reports called hostile pack hunters. He smiled. Somewhere we can make a difference. As their shuttle lifted off from Frosthaven, David looked down at the colony growing smaller below. He could see the thermal wells they had installed, small warm spots on a frozen world, and moving between them, the crystalline creatures that called this place home. The Drakmir had taught him the first lesson 5 years ago in that academy arena. Strength was not about domination. It was about recognition, about seeing another living being and choosing to offer respect instead of fear. The galaxy was full of creatures that roared and threatened and defended their territory. But underneath all that noise, most of them were asking the same question the Drakmir had asked. Are you a threat, or can we trust each other? David had built a career on answering that question honestly. And every time he did, the galaxy became a little bit safer and a little bit kinder. His communicator showed a new message from the academy. Professor Silt wanted to know if he would come back to guest lecture next month. The interspecies communication course had expanded to 3 sections now, with a waiting list of students from across the coalition. David sent back his confirmation. He would teach them what he knew, that every creature had a language, that fear and respect were different things, that violence should be the last option, not the first. But mostly, he would teach them the lesson the Drakmir had taught him on that day 5 years ago, when an ancient war beast had looked at a human cadet and chosen peace. That sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is bow first,